Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Buckeye Politics. It's me, your favorite Ohioan. Today, we're going to be doing my updated 2022 Senate prediction. Governor prediction will be out tomorrow. Um, since we're kind of getting into the, I guess you could say, final stretch of the election season, the midterms are officially basically just 2 months away. We're going to be doing these predictions of maybe two or three times a month instead of just once a month. Normally, we do an updated Senate prediction and an updated governor's prediction on the first of every month. Now, we're going to be probably doing two or three a month. We'll probably do two in September, maybe three in October, and then maybe probably the final in November. But we'll have to just wait and see. Really depends what you guys want, how the race ends up shaping out, the twists and turns of the maybe an October surprise. We'll have to just wait and see. But with that, I'm going to start off this video by saying that I still think Republicans are favored this cycle. I know every time I have to address this, but if you look at the pollsters, the majority of them are there is definitely something there. I will give the Democrats the credit where credit is due, and that's the fact that this is no longer going to be an easy victory for the GOP. There is clearly a very large group of voter bloc, mostly college-educated white voters, who are very upset, millennial types, we know the type, who are very upset about Roe v. Wade, and they are determined to turn out and vote. We saw that in New York in the special elections. The two districts are the 19th district. Republicans should have won that district. Sure, it's very competitive, but it should have been won by the GOP. That said, Democrats won it because the more conservative rural voters, who have always voted Republican, they are not turning out. Meanwhile, college-educated suburbanites are turning out in huge numbers for the Democrats because they're upset over Roe v. Wade. The Republicans can still win this election. They can still easily win the midterms, but they are going to have to really start getting their message out there and start actually campaigning. Right now, the GOP's platform is basically just sit back and hope people say, "Oh, Joe Biden's doing a horrible job. Let's vote red." And that's just not how it works anymore. Maybe 10 years ago in 2010 that would have worked, but now we actually have to get our message out there. We have to really start campaigning, and we can't just assume that because the economy is bad and because everything we see on Fox News points to the GOP winning that we're going to. There is a sizable voting block of people in this country who are going to vote Democrat, and the polls are sure Democratic biased, and if you analyze them, it still looks pretty good for the GOP, but not as good as it was a few months ago. And I don't want us to keep going downhill. We got to recover, and we got to find a way to win this midterm by massive margins and take our country back. We're going to start by filling in the safe Republican states. I apologize for that rant there. They include pretty much the entire Deep South, Kentucky, Indiana, South Carolina, Alaska, Iowa, and Florida. Instead of Iowa, Chuck Grassley is the incumbent Republican. He's been in the Senate since like the 1970s. He's super popular in the state. He's just like this old grandpa farmer who's been in the Senate for like 40 years. He's beloved there. He wins by like 25, 30 points every time. He's going to win handily. Marco Rubio in Florida, I'm not the biggest fan of the guy, but he is still very well liked in the state. With Florida making a massive trend to the right, Ron DeSantis also being on the ballot, and Marco Rubio just being a very popular guy. I mean, back in 2016, Marco Rubio won Florida by 8 points. I don't think it's that big of a stretch that he does 2 points better and wins it by 10. Instead of Alaska, sure, there was that result last night that was horrible, but like I said, it was mostly ranked choice voting that hurt us. Republicans still got 60% of the vote statewide, which is very good, honestly, for the GOP. That's very impressive. They normally don't do that good, even in Alaska. So the fact that even happened, but the Democrats still won, tells me that it was really just ranked choice voting that screwed us over. But I do think that no matter what, a Republican's going to win there. Kelly Tshibaka and Lisa Murkowski are both Republicans, although I would argue Kelly Tshibaka is basically a Democrat at this point. But they're both officially listed as Republicans, and one of them is going to win that race. No questions. The safe Democrat states include states of Oregon, California, Hawaii, Maryland, Connecticut, Vermont, New York, and Illinois as well. I've been saying for a while Illinois might be competitive. I don't think so anymore. I think it's clear that college-educated voters, probably in the Chicago suburbs, are probably going to be voting mostly Democratic. I think we could maybe make it interesting because our nominee has some appeal to that type of voter, but there's really not a whole lot of data, and it looks like that the voters the Republicans would need to win in Illinois are starting to lean Democratic. So I think it's going to be safe D. It's not going to be like a huge blowout. I think it's only going to be like D plus 12 or so, but still safe in my column. We're gonna start by filling in. Let's see. What the likely are states? These are the states that are likely mean that I believe Republicans or Democrats will win them by between 5 and 10 percentage points. So they're states that are a little bit closer than the rest of these, but still should be solid victories for either party. We're going to start by filling in the Wisconsin, which I think is going to be likely for the GOP. Ron Johnson always overperforms the polls. Back in 2016, there was not a single poll that had him winning the election, and he ended up winning it by like 3 points. And he was down pretty heavily. He was down by like 3, 4, or 5 points in all the polls, even up to election night, and he still managed to win by 3. And he was up against a very good candidate in Russ Feingold. Now he's up against a black nationalist, a BLM progressive type who wishes his mom aborted him and said the founding of America was racist. And he's only down by like 1 or 2 in the polls. I think Ron Johnson's going to win handily. Really just because of his opponent. If the Democrats put up a solid candidate, I could maybe see that this race getting closer. But against a horrible candidate, you're already outperforming the polls compared to how you usually do. I think Ron Johnson wins by a likely margin, probably by about 5 points or so. Because people underestimate how well liked Ron Johnson is in the WOW counties. The WOW counties are the Milwaukee suburbs. He is beloved there. He always gets crazy margins there. And I think he's definitely not going to do any worse than Trump in the rural just because of his opponent. So because of that, I think he wins it by about 5 points. The next likely state for the Republicans is my home state of Ohio. J.D. Vance, he's actually starting to campaign. He held an event with Ron DeSantis over in Youngstown 2 weeks ago, I believe. I attended it. It was packed, filled to the brim. It was funny, actually. You know, I was reading online about how Tim Ryan had all this grassroots support, and how, this is Tim Ryan's beloved, and he's beloved by the workers of Northeast Ohio. We go to the rally. The entire room is packed. I was in standing room only. The entire room was filled to the brim. There was just people and after people. Their parking lot was filled to the brim. I think they were turning people away. Actually, the line was around the building. There was standing room only in the back, and it was packed. And we were in Girard, Ohio, which is near Youngstown, which is a Democratic stronghold. This is an area that voted for the Democratic Party by huge margins. They're a unionized area. It voted overwhelmingly Democrat for a long time. Trump, however, has started to put it in the Republican column. This is an area that Tim Ryan would have to do well in order to win, and he's not. The Vance had this rally. The room was packed. The energy was completely on our side. There was a small group of Tim Ryan protesters saying I don't know, pro-choice. They had like pro-choice signs and like a pride flag out there. There were like 12 boomers out there. It was so funny. You have this entire huge conference room full of conservatives, and then outside there was like a dozen Tim Ryan protesters. It was so funny. And we're supposed to be in Tim Ryan country. We're in his district. We're in a solidly Democratic area because Tim Ryan's this great hero for the working class people of Ohio. But yet, it's just interesting that only 12 of them even turned out as sort of like an anti-protest, and the entire room was filled with J.D. Vance supporters. So, like I said, I don't think Tim Ryan's only pathway to victory would do very well in those traditionally Democratic areas, which he's not. I'm on the ground. I can see it. He's not. The polls are just coping. So, Vance is going to win by a likely margin. North Carolina is also going to be likely. Cheri Beasley, the Democratic nominee, she was the Supreme Court Justice for the state of North Carolina. She lost re-election in 2020 despite leading in every single poll. And right now, the polls have the race pretty competitive, actually. It looked like it would be a solid victory for Ted Budd, who's the Republican nominee. He's a great candidate, but right now, the race has started to look a little bit more competitive. But do keep in mind 2 things. One is that Cheri Beasley led in every single poll in her election in 2020, and she still lost. And 2, polls always have Democrats doing well in North Carolina. Every single election since 2008, 2010, 2012, 2014, 2016, 2018, 2020, the polls have said North Carolina is going to go Democratic, and the Democrats doing great in North Carolina. And then the Republicans went up by like 2 or 3 points. So the polls are already basically having the race at a dead heat. So a lot of them have Ted Budd up. I think he's going by a likely margin. And Ted Budd he's just a good fit for North Carolina. His whole persona fits the state. He's going to do very well in some of those blue-collar, white working-class counties, and he's also going to do pretty well in the suburbs as well. We're going to fill in the likely Democratic states, of which there are just 2. Those are the states of Washington and Colorado. Starting in Washington, this is a state I thought Republicans could do well in. I'm kind of taking that back a little bit. It really just depends on one factor, and that is the housing crisis. So for those of you who do not know, there was some sort of report that millions and millions of Americans are actually struggling to pay their rent and or mortgages and could be basically evicted from their households by the end of this year. And obviously with the inflation and with spending, the housing market is very wonky. It's it's iffy right now. Some places it's really good, some places it's really bad. One of the places it's really bad is Seattle, Washington. They're already in a housing crisis, and with this new thing looming that possibly millions and millions of homeowners could be evicted, and rents could be raised, mortgages could be raised, and inflation. I think if something were to hit the fan and that were to become a huge issue, then I do think Washington would become a very competitive state very quickly. That said, it seems the voters that Tiffany Smiley would need to win. Tiffany Smiley is the Republican nominee. If she were to win in Washington, she would have to win over college-educated white voters in the suburbs. That would be key to her victory. And with those voters, as we saw in New York and even Colorado to an extent, even Alaska to an extent, beginning to turn out heavily for the Democrats, I just don't think it's going to happen. In Alaska, those types of voters that she would need to win turned out heavily for the Democrat, and they're energized because they're upset over Roe v. Wade and all that good stuff. They have to do their resisting. And so because of that, I do think that it is going to be a likely margin. I think Tiffany Smiley does very well in the rurals. If you look at the primary result, she did pretty well, all things considered. But I just don't see a pathway to victory unless something really hits the fan. State of Colorado is also going to be likely. This is a state that I thought Republicans could do well in for the longest time. I thought, we could possibly make it interesting because we have a good candidate. But no, Joe O'Dea is a pretty bad fit for the state. I mean, he's a good fit for like the Denver suburbs, but for Republicans to win in Colorado, they have to do decently in the rural areas, which are very socially conservative areas. They're basically like Wyoming or Utah or the neighboring states, while also doing well in the Denver suburbs. Trump did very well in the rural farm country, I guess you could say mountain parts of Colorado, while he did getting absolutely obliterated in the Denver suburbs. And so Joe O'Dea's brilliant plan was to campaign only for the Denver suburbs. And his message is basically, I'm pro-weed, I'm pro-gay, I'm pro-abortion. And he expects to do well in rural Colorado. He's just not. And while he might do a little bit better in the Denver suburbs, people in rural parts of Colorado are not going to turn out for him. And even then, how well can he do in the suburbs that have grown tremendously with liberals from California? Probably not. He's probably not going to do that well, honestly. He might make a few small gains, but he's really not going to do that well. And so because of that, I do think the state is likely Democratic. We're going to start by filling in the lean and tilt states. These are the 5 states here: New Hampshire, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Arizona, and Nevada. These are the 5 states I believe will be the most competitive of the cycle. We're going to start by filling in the lean states for the Republicans, of which there are 2. These are states I believe the GOP candidates will win by between 1 and 5 percentage points. Those are Nevada and Georgia. Starting in Nevada, Catherine Cortez Masto, the Democrat incumbent, she's struggling to get over 50% of the vote, which is always horrible news for an incumbent. If you really want to know about a race, look at the polls and see if the incumbent can get over 50%. If the incumbent gets over 50%, they're probably in a decent position, especially this far out. If they're not, they're probably in a bad position. And with Adam Laxalt running a very solid campaign, he's very well liked in Nevada. I mean, Adam Laxalt ran for governor in 2018 and against a very popular Democrat in a very Democrat-favorable environment, and he only lost by 4 points. He made the race very close, and now he's going up against Catherine Cortez Masto, who is not disliked, but she's certainly not liked in the state. She's just kind of like, Her approval rating is pretty much around 50%, and probably a little bit lower. It's just like, like half of. No one really cares about her. She's not very popular. And because of that, I think Adam Laxalt's going to win by about 2 to 3 points. He's just a good fit for the state. If we look at the trends, national environment, Trump did very well in Nevada, all things considered. He made huge gains with Hispanic working class voters in Las Vegas, and as we saw from the results in Texas and some polls from states like Pennsylvania or Georgia, I think that's going to continue. I think Republicans are still going to continue to do well with Hispanics, and I think Adam Laxalt's going to win Nevada by about 2 to 3 points. Instead of Georgia, Herschel Walker, the Republican nominee, he seemed to have this race locked in for a little while. Over the summer, polls began to show Raphael Warnock, the Democrat, making the race a little bit competitive and actually possibly even taking a small lead. But recently, 3 polls have all come out showing Herschel Walker doing very well in the state. He has the lead. He started to gain momentum. Herschel Walker, he's just a good fit for Georgia. I mean, Raphael Warnock literally only won because the Republican nominee was Kelly Loeffler. Kelly Loeffler was a horrible candidate. She was never even elected to begin with. She was literally just an insider, elitist billionaire who knew Brian Kemp, and Brian Kemp probably owed her a favor from a campaign donation 20 years ago, and so he appointed her. I don't even think she was from Georgia. I think she's from New Jersey or something originally. And then her whole campaign is just saying radical liberal Raphael Warnock. She was a robot. She just repeated the same things over and over. She had no actual platform. Raphael Warnock, however, was really out there campaigning. He got strong African American turnout in the urban areas, and he also did pretty well in the suburbs, all things considered. And it was in a Democrat-favorable environment, and even then, he still only won by about a point or 2. So because of that, I think in a slightly more, I guess you'd say, balanced environment with a very charismatic, a very epic candidate in Herschel Walker. Absolutely love that guy. He's a Chad. I think the Republicans are going to win this race by 2 to 3 points, especially now that Herschel Walker is starting to do better in the polls. Warnock's in trouble. Now, the only lean Democratic state is the state of New Hampshire, which is going to lean to the Democrats. Really, just depends on who the Republicans nominate and how that campaign turns out. It's really just too early to tell. I mean, right, their primary hasn't even happened yet. We don't even know who the nominee is going to be. We really only have two main candidates, of which one can certainly win. Chuck Morris, who's the running. I think he has a solid chance at winning. Meanwhile, Don Bolduc, the other Republican running, he won't win. If Morris wins the nomination, I think this race gets very competitive very quickly. If Don Bolduc wins, I think it's pretty solidly lean Democratic. We're going to start by filling in the two last states, of which the states of Pennsylvania and Arizona. These are the two states that I believe will be the most competitive of the cycle. Of which one is going to tilt to the Republican Party, while one is going to tilt to the Democratic Party. I'm going to start in Arizona. It is going to tilt to Blake Masters. Blake Masters is a venture capitalist. He's done a lot of stuff with Peter Thiel, who is a very famous, I guess you'd say, billionaire, kind of like Silicon Valley type. And Blake Masters is a very smart guy. He knows how to. He's a genius. I'm just going to say this. He's a very smart guy. He knows how to effectively attack Mark Kelly. Blake Masters has launched some of the best ads and is running a pretty solid campaign, all things considered. He has done an incredible job of pivoting to the general election. He is appealing to those independent, moderate voters who probably would have voted for Mark Kelly. He's saying, look, Mark Kelly votes with Joe Biden 100% of the time. Look, Mark Kelly supports things that are absolutely crazy across the world. He's running a great campaign. He is, all things considered. I've had some doubts. I heard some things that, Blake Masters is too far right to win. He has no chance. If you look at the polls, he's already made the race a little bit more competitive. There were some polls back in 2020 that had Martha McSally getting absolutely crushed. Obviously, they overestimated Mark Kelly, and they still have Mark Kelly up, but by like 5 points less than they had him up over Martha McSally. For example, there was one poll that in 2020 had Mark Kelly winning by 10 points over the Republican nominee, and now they only have Mark Kelly up 5. And this is when we're still in November, and we're not even close to November. We're not even at Labor Day yet. The campaign season just kicking off. Republicans always do better in it'll always do better than the polls over the summer suggest. And because of that, I think Blake Masters pulls off a very narrow but a very solid victory. If Mark Kelly is a strong candidate for Arizona, credit where credit is due, but Blake Masters is running too good of a campaign to lose, in my opinion. Mark Kelly's basically just done nothing. I mean, he's barely even campaigning it, despite having millions of dollars. Mark Kelly has outraised Blake Masters by $50 million, and Blake Masters is still running a better campaign than him. So, you add that into consideration. You look at the polls. I think Blake Masters wins this race by a tilt margin. State of Pennsylvania. I have gone back and forth with Pennsylvania over the last couple of days, couple of weeks, really, and I think it's going to be tilt Democratic at this point. I love Mehmet Oz. I love Dr. Oz. That guy's a Chad, and I think in the end he probably. Oh, I don't know. I just don't know. Let me lay it out here. We'll leave it as toss-up. Let me lay it out here. So I think Dr. Oz in the end is probably going to have. Dr. Oz has a pathway to victory. There is certainly a very wide open path Dr. Oz can take to win this election. The question is, will he take it? He's been campaigning his ass off. He's been doing everything he can to win over the Trumpian base, but really it's out of his control. There are outsiders, people on Twitter, people in the Republican establishment, and some grifters who are refusing to support Oz. They're intentionally raising questions about his past, and they are really hurting him. There was a recent poll that came out that had Oz only getting 60% of the Republican vote. Everyone else is either undecided or possibly voting for John Fetterman. And Fetterman is a good candidate from Pennsylvania. He has a lot of appeal to the rural areas, and he's also progressive enough that he can do well in Philadelphia. But he is, I guess you'd say, has enough blue-collar appeal to do well in some of the rural areas. He is a solid candidate. I think Conor Lamb is a better candidate, and I don't think he's a great candidate, but he is still a decent candidate. So Dr. Oz, if he wants to win, he has to unite the Republican base, which is something that I thought he could do for a long time, and there's still a part of me that thinks he can, but right now it just hasn't happened yet. And so because of that, I think I am going to put the race as tilt Democratic. I love Dr. Oz. That guy's a Chad, and like I said, there is definitely a pathway to victory, and it's just not in Oz's control. Oz is working his ass off, but he's getting screwed over by Republican insiders, Republican politicians who just don't like him and who are grifters. They want to see the America First movement fail, and because of that, they're intentionally painting doubts about Oz's intentions. And I think that Oz can definitely counter that. I think he's done a great job with what he's been given. He's just been dealt a horrible hand this entire cycle, and because despite the fact the race is still pretty competitive. So like I said, there is still a pathway to victory for Oz. Just right now, I don't see it. So with that, thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed. Hope you learned something. If you don't agree with my predictions, cope, because they're going to be right. And hope you enjoy this video. Like and subscribe for more if you're new.